Coming up on Network Africa. Airstrikes on campus of Khartoum's International University of Africa kills Congolese nationals. Normalcy slowly returns in Senegal following deadly protests. Plus, Rwandan president reshuffles top military officers. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We're staying with our coverage of the crisis in Sudan, where clashes between warring parties escalated in the capital Khartoum on Sunday. The fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the rival Rapid Support Forces has persisted despite repeated truces. The latest agreement, which expired on Saturday evening, was signed in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia on May 20 between representatives of the two sides and lasted for 7 days for humanitarian assistance. Clashes also intensified in the western region of Darfur, where at least 40 civilians were killed. Authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo claim that 10 nationals have been killed after their university campus at the International University of Africa was bombarded in airstrikes in Khartoum. In a statement, the Foreign Affairs Ministry wrote it had learned with deep dismay of the killing of its citizens at the International University of Africa. Foreign Affairs Minister Christophe Letundula stated that there were indications the airstrikes were carried out by the regular army on an area occupied by civilian and unarmed populations. He adds that the government was waiting for the Sudanese authorities to shed more light on this incident. In the meantime, shortage of food, medicine and especially water is becoming extremely acute as clashes escalate in Sudan's greater capital. Fierce fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the rival Rapid Support Forces had intensified and spread across the greater capital area of Sudan, comprising Khartoum, Omdurman and Khartoum North, as well as Darfur. The fighting has further exacerbated the already precarious humanitarian situation in the country. The people of the greater capital area are trapped in a stressful situation with power, gas and communication being cut off and food, water and medicine running out. Now we're joined by VOA correspondent, Africa correspondent, Mohammed Yusuf. He joins us online from Nairobi, Kenya. Hello again, Mohammed.
Hello there.
So we have to ask, why are bombs coming anywhere hostels, especially where foreign students are harbored?
It is a confirmation of what is really happening in that country, and students are being attacked, places they stay. That is a confirmation of what's really happening on the ground, what is really happening in the situation, and how far this conflict has gone, and it is going, and it's getting more deadly. And it's also a confirmation that the violence is escalating, and from the people who are attacked in places like where they are students, it also shows a desperation, how far the warring parties have gone. You remember that there have been complaints, particularly from the Sudan National Army during the talks, that some of the reasons why they were pulling out of the talks was to do with the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, the paramilitary, refusing to leave civilian infrastructure. And there have been accusations of some of those RSF fighters occupying people's homes and strategic places, government offices and people's homes and several main streets. And so you can imagine that is what the situation is like now. And that is a confirmation of how far things are going if there is no truce or there is no agreement to end the conflict and bring those warring parties on the table and agree on a ceasefire.
Normally, warring parties are supposed to steer clear from the civilian population. Is there a reason why hostels, hospitals, and similar places seem to be in the crossfire?
During the talks, both parties agreed to protect civilians and respect where civilians were occupying or where civilians were staying, and provide safe areas for civilians. That is not what is happening, and that is also becoming at a time when both parties are not in good terms. They're not talking. They are not on the table, even though their representatives are in Saudi Arabia. But it clearly shows one thing, that an escalation and also a desperation. Remember, this is 8 weeks now of conflict, and this is now, it appears to be a protracted conflict, and no one seems to be pushing anyone, and civilians are living in thousands now. The number is 400,000, 1.2 million people, according to aid agencies, are now displaced in the country. Now it is a time, and because there's a push also and a pressure from the several actors, the African Union, the America, and also the Saudis, and also some other countries, for the both parties to come on the table. And as they also look ways to come on the table, there's also now an escalation of a conflict, and it looked like maybe the both parties are trying to get an upper hand before they get on the table. But that is also it is coming at a cost, even though they want to feel that maybe they are coming on the table very strong, but that is also risking civilians' life. That is what it looks like, and what it appears now that is taking place. More civilians getting killed, particularly the Congolese students.
Can Sudan be forced to seriously consider another truce to evacuate more civilians?
There's a good sign. Of course, the representatives are still stationed in Jeddah. That is a good sign, and positive signs that there is a way that they're willing to continue with the talks. But of course, there are conditions, and the conditions have been set by the Sudan National Army, that RSF has to respect the truce agreement, and leaving the infrastructure, leaving some of the areas they occupy, and that is not something that is happening. But will there be another truce? Yes, of course, so long as they are there, there's a possibility of another. But that will come at a cost, because now we are talking of students getting killed, and more civilians now will come under attack before anyone agree to go to that table. And that is a danger now we are facing, even though, yes, we will go to the table, but at what cost? And now it is getting more dangerous for the population in Sudan.
I know that a lot of countries, raced to evacuate a lot of their nationals from Sudan when the fighting first started, and students were among those that left the country. It's an unfortunate situation for the Congolese government. So have you heard anything from Congo and the next steps to be taken?
Other than the statement issued by the Foreign Ministry, there haven't been much information coming from the government itself. But they ask for answers. Of course, that is what they're looking for, and they have also called for the Sudan government to look to find ways to help to get the remains of those students who were killed. And now it is also how we are going to see who is really in charge of that country. They just said Sudan authorities. Now we know that there are two authorities there, the RSF and the Sudan National Army, led by the Al-Burhan, and the RSF led by Ahmeti. So we are going to see who will respond and who will take the initiative to secure those remains and make sure, maybe try to transport those. But more importantly, as you mentioned, evacuation, many countries and many foreigners, particularly Africans, are still stuck, particularly students. There are many students from countries that are grappling with conflict. Democratic Republic of Congo, some of those students may be finding it very difficult to go back home, because home sometimes also too dangerous. There's political volatility there. In neighboring countries, Chad, Somalia, the region itself, Ethiopia, with its own historical issue of political tensions and, of course, human rights. So there are going to be a lot of many people might not be willing to leave, but as fighting escalates, I think they will be trying to look the other side, particularly trying to get help from aid agencies, maybe to help them evacuate, and to where now some of those students are actually coming from dangerous places. Where will you take them? That is also something maybe we'll be discussing in the near future, and we'll see how that pans out in the coming weeks.
Mohammed, thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Elsewhere, the dust is finally settling in Senegal after deadly confrontations between the police and supporters of the embattled opposition leader Ousmane Sonko in response to his guilty verdict on charges of corrupting the youth. The bustling city has once again come back to its usual routine with informal establishments which account for a large percentage of workers resuming their activities. Some of the city residents say the demos are economically unsustainable. Clashes between Sonko's supporters and police broke out after the ruling, with shops and businesses being ransacked. Officials put the number of deaths over 2 days at 15. Well, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame has appointed new military and intelligence chiefs in a major reshuffle. The president appointed Juvenal Marizamunda as the new defense minister, replacing Major General Albert Murasira, who had occupied the post since 2018. A new army chief, Lieutenant General Mubarak Muganga, is taken over from General Jean Bosco Kazura, who ran the Rwanda Defense Force since November 2019. A reshuffle in which a defense minister and army chief are fired at the same time is not common in Rwanda. No reasons have been given for the reshuffle. In previous changes to the upper echelons of military, Mr. Kagame would at times publicly hint at the reason. In a Monday night reshuffle, Mr. Kagame also appointed a new army chief of staff, that's land forces, as well as a head of military intelligence. He also changed the top commanders of Rwandan troops deployed in Mozambique to help fight militant Islamists. Over in Kenya, trouble is brewing where police have fired tear gas to disperse protesters demonstrating in the capital against some of the government's proposed measures to impose new or higher taxes on items, including fuel. Dozens of protesters had sought to gather at a park in the center of Nairobi before marching to Parliament to urge MPs to reject the tax proposals. One of the key contested measures is the unpopular finance bill, is a new 3% housing fund levy and all salaried workers, and to increase value-added tax on fuel to 16%. The bill also calls for taxes on beauty products, cryptocurrencies, and earnings by social media influencers. They're among the measures that have been proposed by many Kenyans. Legislators are set to debate the bill on Thursday amid warnings issued by President William Ruto and his deputy, Rigathi Gachagua, against those opposed to the proposals. Still in Kenya, the United Nations Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, is set to hold its second session of the UN Habitat Assembly in the capital, Nairobi, to address problems such as housing shortages and climate change-related challenges being seen across the world. The new urban agenda adopted at the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development in Ecuador in 2016 seeks to use a transformative approach to achieve sustainable urbanization. The second session of the UN Habitat comes at a time when many developing countries are still struggling to meet their sustainable development goals, a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. More people and places are being left behind as the ripple effects of various shocks threaten communities.
The government policies and regulation. Not only the government policies, to prepare the government policies and also to prepare the regulation, but to implement it. I think that is very, very important for us. And also to look into housing as an integrated approach. The outcome is that not only another report, not only another resolutions, but is with the action plan. We have to act now. So hopefully each of these 5 priorities, we will have the action plan, and also not only the action plan, but also the finance.
Israel has handed over the body of an Egyptian policeman accused of killing 3 Israeli soldiers in an attack next to the border between the two countries on Saturday. The policeman has been named as 22-year-old Mohammed Salah Ibrahim. Reports in the Egyptian media say that he had been drafted into the Egyptian army a year ago and stationed as a policeman on the Israeli border. He's reported to have suffered mental distress following the death of a fellow soldier. The Israeli army believes he acted alone. The humanitarian situation in the Central African Republic remains critical, with 3.4 million people, or half the population, in need of assistance. Of that figure, 2.4 million have needs so severe that their survival and dignity is at risk. That's according to the humanitarian coordinator of the CAR, Mohamed Ayoya, who has been briefing reporters in Geneva. Mr. Ayoya, who is also Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General of the UN Mission in the CAR and Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, attributed the crisis to underlying factors which are exacerbated by the long-lasting conflict.
The number of people in need of humanitarian assistance and protection in CAR is quite high. We are talking about 3.4 million people spread over 623,000 square kilometers area due to underlying factors which are exacerbated by the long-lasting conflict, including, of course, lack of basic services such as healthcare, clean water and social protection. Due to armed violence, 1 in 5 Central Africans is either an IDP or a refugee in neighboring countries. It is against this background that the ongoing conflict in Sudan is unfortunately also exacerbating the situation in CAR. As of 24 of May 2023, we have more than 13,000 people, actually a little bit less than 14,000, including Central African returnees who have preventively fled from Sudan to Amdafok in CAR on one side, and about 10,000 people have also fled Chad, both Chadians but also Central African returnees who have also came into CAR.
Police in South Africa have confirmed the death of one of the lead investigators into the daring prison escape of rapist and murderer Thabo Bester. Police say they were investigating the circumstances around the apparent death by suicide of 59-year-old Brigadier Jackson Mikulesi, who was found dead in his car on Monday. Earlier in the day, he attended a court hearing where Bester's girlfriend, celebrity Dr. Nandifa Mogundumana, lost her application to declare her arrest in Tanzania unlawful. News of Brigadier Mikulesi's death has sent shockwaves around South Africa. The police detective with 31 years of service has been described as a hardworking and loyal officer. Mr. Bester is known as the Facebook rapist for using social networking sites to lure his victims. He faked his death to break out of prison last year. He and his girlfriend, who is accused of helping him escape, were arrested in Tanzania in April and brought back to South Africa to face justice. And South African businesses and other institutions are recycling their food waste to reduce the amount dumped in landfills and cut methane emissions. Though the country's waste management industry is evolving, South Africa is still generating about 10 million tons of food waste, according to a study by the Waste Research, Development and Innovation Roadmap. Here's a report.
When food waste decomposes in landfills, it releases methane gas, a potent greenhouse gas with a global warming potential greater than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. But a local company, Earth Probiotic, has made it its mission to limit the amount of waste in landfill sites by selling a subscription service to businesses, schools and households with composting bins and bokashi powder for 2,500 rands. That's about $130 a month to recycle their food waste. The company services over 300 clients across South Africa. Bokashi powder is a mix of wheat bran, rice hulks and sawdust sprayed with microorganisms that help food waste ferment and decompose before turning into compost. At St. Albans College, a boarding school in Pretoria, food waste recycling was recently adopted as part of a kitchen operation to avoid throwing away excess food in rubbish bins.
There's actually two parts to this, where actually we have green waste and also wet waste from the kitchen, where we take the wet waste, which is the food, and then we mix it with the bokashi, where we come at the later stage, and actually after 2 weeks we mix it with our green waste. In that way we creating compost, which we also use back into the school in terms of lawns and gardens.
Currently, ground staff at the school collect more than 100 bokashi bins a week to recycle into compost.
To us, it is important. We feel that it's part of the education that we need to teach young ones. And secondly, obviously, like I said, social responsibility. I think that's the second one. And to also help in terms of the carbon footprint.
Ready to go. So what you do?
Owner of Earth Probiotic, Gavin Heron, says he diverts more than 500 tons of food waste monthly from landfill sites.
The world is in crisis. We all know about climate change, that our world is in trouble. We all have to do our bit, reducing our personal impact and our business impact on the environment. And we have to, and World Environment Day actually gives us that opportunity to really think about what we do, think about biodiversity, think about carbon dioxide emissions, think about waste, and think about the future for our planet and for everyone and everything that lives on it.
So the compost is not sold commercially, but usually given to landscapers or residents for household use. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, roughly 1/3 of the food produced globally for human consumption is lost or wasted, amounting to approximately 1.3 billion tons per year.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the international community needs to take urgent steps under current arrangements to relieve the burden on developing and emerging economies. According to the UN chief, the policy brief on reform of the international finance architecture sets out ambitious, concrete proposals in 6 areas to address historic injustices and systemic bias. He was presenting the latest set of policy briefs on our common agenda.
Policy brief on moving beyond gross domestic product looks at measuring the things that really matter to people and their communities. GDP tells us the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Our world is not a gigantic corporation. Financial decisions should be based on more than a snapshot of profit and loss. And the policy brief on a global digital compact sets out ways to advance an open, free, secure, people-centered, equitable digital future at a time of growing anxiety about the impact of technology on our lives. All these briefs provide ideas on how we can revitalize the multilateral system, accelerate efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and keep global temperature rise as close as possible to the 1.5-degree limit of the Paris Agreement. Most of us will never travel to space. It can be hard to understand why we should care what is happening there with so much poverty and hunger here on Earth. But dramatic advances in space mean that what happens there has implications for us all. Space assets already play a growing role in navigation, internet provision, and monitoring trends on Earth, from energy and climate to biodiversity and a host of other vital functions. Nearly 40% of SDG targets rely on data from space. The policy brief provides you with proposals on mitigating the risks and harnessing the opportunities of space in the most inclusive way possible. The international community needs to take urgent steps under current arrangements to relieve the burden on developing and emerging economies.
And finally on the program, it's no ordinary concert that Hughes Guba puts on in his native Burkina Faso. The rapper uses his gifts to entertain the crowd, but uses the proceeds for development in the crisis-worn country. The crowds love the music, which Guba is using to fund what he sees as a very important aspect of community life: education.
Under the multicolored strobe lights of Ouagadougou's largest sports arena, a crane lowers Burkinabe rapper Hughes Guba towards a sea of clamoring college students eager to hear some of their favorite songs in exchange for the cost of a ticket. The money will be destined for greater places than Guba's pockets. However, banners throughout the arena read "One concert, one school," signaling to the audience that a portion of every purchase will go to building a school in a village without one.
That's why we came out, to support this young man and to show that in Africa too, there are young people who think about these kinds of projects. And he's an example to follow.
Burkina Faso's struggle to contain an Islamist insurgency has faltered in recent months, creating one of the world's fastest growing populations of internally displaced people. The fighting has also left education access in Burkina Faso critically impaired, with over 1 million children affected by school closures and 6,134 academic institutions shut as of February. According to the Norwegian Refugee Council, that marks an increase of over 40% since the end of the previous school year. Guba, who goes by the stage name Hugo Boss, hopes that by holding concerts with a specific aim of fundraising for schools in such areas, he can prove that locals are capable of closing that gap without leaning on international aid. His first school, fully funded through concert sales, is nearing completion, and he aims to complete more by the end of the year. If successful, he hopes to expand the one concert, one school model to include clinics and nurseries.
That's the program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.